My name is Hannah, and I'm going to tell you how my life changed on my first wedding anniversary. At the time, I lived with my husband, Adam, in a small apartment in the 15th arrondissement of Paris. Our life seemed perfect to others, but the reality was very different. Adam and I had met 2 years earlier at an opening at the art gallery where I worked. He was charming, caring, and our first months together had been like a dream. But little by little, things changed. Adam had become distant, sometimes even cruel in his words. I often found myself walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do something that might upset him. Still, when Adam told me he wanted to do something special for our anniversary, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe all was not lost. Maybe he really wanted to save our relationship. He suggested a romantic getaway near the Hérisson waterfalls in the Jura, where we had one of our most memorable first dates. On the day of departure, we hit the road early in the morning. The atmosphere in the car was strange. Adam looked nervous, but at the same time, there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. He would glance furtively in my direction while driving, but said almost nothing. When the silence became too heavy, he simply turned up the volume on the radio. During the ride, I thought about our history, the happy times we had shared, but also the way things had deteriorated. I wondered if this weekend was really going to change anything, or if it was just a desperate attempt on my part to hold on to something that no longer existed. After several hours of driving, we finally arrived at the small village of Ménétreux-Anjou near the waterfalls. Adam parked the car in the lot near the trail that led to the waterfalls. The place was isolated, surrounded by a dense forest of fir and beech trees. The fresh air and smell of nature instantly reminded me of our first stay here. "Shall we take a little walk?" Adam suggested, with a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. I nodded, hoping this moment together would bring us closer. We began walking along the trail, the sound of the flowing water growing louder as we approached the waterfalls. The scenery was beautiful, sunlight filtering through the trees, reflecting off the crystal-clear water. Still, I couldn't completely relax. Something about Adam's attitude bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. When we reached the edge of the main waterfall, Adam stopped and turned to me. His face had changed. It was no longer the warm smile he had displayed earlier, but an expression I didn't recognize. His eyes were cold, almost cruel. "Hannah," he said in a voice I didn't recognize. "You know, I've been thinking a lot lately." My heart sank. I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. "I can't go on like this," he continued. "This life, this marriage, it's not what I want." I was in shock. "Adam, what are you talking about? I thought we came here to fix things to..." He cut me off with an icy laugh that made my blood run cold. "Make things right? No, Hannah, I came here to end things." Before I could react, I felt his hands push me violently. In a split second, I realized what was happening, but it was too late. I fell backward into the void toward the tumultuous water below. The last thing I heard before my body hit the icy water was Adam's voice screaming, "Finally free after a year of imprisonment." The shock of the cold water took my breath away. The force of the current carried me away immediately, spinning me around like a rag doll. I struggled to the surface, my lungs burning with the need for air. When I finally managed to take a breath, I was immediately submerged again by a wave. For what seemed like an eternity, I was tossed around by the rushing waters, unable to regain control. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but amidst the chaos, a memory surfaced. My father teaching me to swim in the lake near our childhood home in Annecy. "Don't be afraid of the water, my little Hannah," he had said. "Let it carry you. Breathe calmly and let your body float." Guided by this memory, I managed to calm my breathing and let myself be carried by the current rather than fighting against it. Little by little, I moved toward the edge of the river. After what felt like an eternity, my feet finally touched the rocky bottom. Exhausted, bruised, I pulled myself onto the bank. My clothes were soaked and torn, my body covered in bruises and cuts. I collapsed onto the ground, panting, my heart still racing. As I caught my breath, the reality of what had just happened hit me hard. Adam, my husband, the man I loved, had tried to kill me. It was not an accident, not a moment of madness. It was premeditated, calculated, Tears began to flow down my cheeks, mixing with the river water still running down my face. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional pain tearing me apart from the inside out. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have seen the darkness within the man I had shared my life with? But amidst the pain, something else began to rise within me. Burning anger slowly consumed the sorrow and fear. Adam thought he had killed me. He thought he was rid of me. But I was alive, and that thought ignited a flame of determination within me. I struggled to my feet, each movement a painful reminder of my fall. I had to act quickly. Adam would surely verify that his plan had worked. I couldn't stay here. Despite the pain, I began walking along the bank, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the site of my fall. I needed to find help, but I also had to think about my next move. One thing was certain. The Hannah Adam knew, the gentle, submissive woman, had died in that fall. In her place, someone new was born, someone who would never allow herself to be mistreated again. As I trudged through the forest, my mind raced. I had to disappear, make Adam believe his plan had succeeded. It was the only way to gain the upper hand. But how? I had nothing on me. No money, no phone. Suddenly, in the distance, I heard the sound of a car. I headed toward it, hoping to find the road. After a few minutes of walking, I finally saw a small country road through the trees. This was my chance. I stepped out of the forest and stood by the roadside, praying that a vehicle would pass soon. I didn't have to wait long. An old Peugeot appeared around a bend. Waving wildly, I held my breath as the car slowed to a stop. A man, around 50, stepped out, his face full of concern. "Madam, are you okay? Did you have an accident?" he asked. I quickly decided not to reveal too much. "Yes, I slipped near the waterfall. I need help. Please." The man, whose name was Jean-Pierre, didn't hesitate. He helped me into his car and drove me to the nearest village, Moirans. During the ride, I was deep in thought. I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. Adam would have the advantage too easily. No, I had to disappear completely first. In Moiran, Jean-Pierre insisted on taking me to the hospital, but I politely refused, claiming I was fine and just needed to contact my family. He left me outside a small cafe in the town center after pressing a few bills into my hand so I could get something to eat. Alone, I took a deep breath. Now, it really began. Stepping inside the cafe, I asked to use their phone. There was only one person I could call, Clara, the friend I trusted most. When she answered, relief washed over me. "Clara, it's Hannah. I need your help. Don't ask questions for now, please. Can you come pick me up in Moirans, in the Jura? I'll explain everything, but it's urgent. It's a matter of life and death." A long silence followed. Then Clara replied, "I'm coming. Text me the exact address. I'll be there in a few hours." As I hung up for the first time since the fall, I felt a flicker of hope. This was only the beginning, but I was determined. Adam had wanted to destroy me, but he had failed. Now, it was my turn to act. The wait for Clara felt endless. Every bump in the road still echoed through my body, reminding me of my fall from the Hérisson waterfalls. But more than the physical pain, it was Adam's betrayal that burned inside me. How could the man I had loved, the one I had trusted with my life, do this to me? Sitting on a bench in front of the cafe where Jean-Pierre had dropped me off, I anxiously scanned the street. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky in shades of orange. Passers-by cast curious glances my way, no doubt puzzled by my disheveled appearance and still damp clothes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw Clara's little red Clio pull up in front of the cafe. She jumped out, her eyes scanning the street until they landed on me. Her face fell. "Hannah, my God, what happened?" she cried, running toward me. I stood up, wincing at the pain as Clara rushed forward. She wrapped her arms around me, careful not to hurt me further. "It's a long story," I murmured. "Can we go somewhere to talk?" Clara nodded. I booked a room at a small hotel nearby. "We'll be safe there." The ride to the hotel was silent, but I could feel Clara's worried gaze on me. She didn't push me to talk. Once inside the room, I sank onto the bed, exhausted. Clara sat beside me, waiting patiently. I took a deep breath and began. The words spilled out in a torrent. Unstoppable. I told her everything, the gradual deterioration of my relationship with Adam, his growing coldness, his cruelty. Then, I described the fateful day, the romantic getaway that had turned into a nightmare. As I spoke, I saw Clara's face shift from shock to horror to fury. "That bastard," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Hannah, you need to go to the police. He tried to kill you." I shook my head. Not yet. Adam thinks I'm dead. That's our advantage." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" I stood up and began pacing, ignoring the pain radiating through my body. "If we go to the police now, it'll be my word against his. He'll say it was an accident, that I slipped. And who will they believe?" Clara frowned. "But you can't let him get away with this." "I have no intention of letting him get away with it," I replied, a new determination in my voice. "But I want to do it right. I want him to pay for what he did, and for that, I need proof." I stopped walking and looked Clara straight in the eyes. "I need your help, Clara. I need to disappear for a while. Adam must not know that I'm alive. In the meantime, I'll gather everything I can against him." Clara studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, what can I do?" A wave of relief washed over me. Having Clara by my side changed everything. First, I need a place to stay. Somewhere Adam would never think to look. Clara thought for a moment. "My aunt has a small house in a village in Auvergne. She almost never uses it. I'm sure she'll agree to lend it to you if I tell her you need a quiet place to recover from, let's say, burnout." I nodded, grateful. "That would be perfect. Then I'll need you to collect some things for me from the apartment, clothes, my laptop, important documents. But you'll have to be discreet. Adam mustn't suspect anything." Clara took my hand and squeezed it. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. We'll make him pay, Hannah. I promise." That night, lying in the hotel bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the day's events. I saw Adam's face again, his cold eyes as he pushed me. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen the darkness behind his charm? But amid the storm of emotions, one thing was clear. I could no longer be the woman I had been. The sweet, naive Hannah had drowned in the tumultuous waters of the Arizon waterfalls. In her place was someone stronger, more determined. The next morning, Clara and I set off for Auvergne. The journey was long and silent. I watched the landscapes pass by, trying to imagine the life ahead of me. How would I rebuild everything Adam had destroyed? Clara's aunt's house was in a small village called Saint-Nectaire, nestled in the heart of the Auvergne Volcanoes Regional Natural Park. It was an old stone house with a slate roof and blue shutters. The place was picturesque, far removed from anything I had ever known. "This is where you'll be able to rebuild yourself," Clara said, handing me the keys. "No one will come looking for you here." I hugged her tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you, Clara. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You're stronger than you think, Hannah. You'll get through this." "I know you will." After Clara left, I found myself alone in the unfamiliar house. The silence was deafening. For the first time since my fall, I allowed myself to truly cry. I wept for the life I had lost, for the love that had been a lie, for the trust that had been shattered. But beneath the pain, something else took root. Determination. Adam had tried to destroy me, but he had failed. I was still here, and I was going to fight. The following days were difficult. Every movement reminded me of my injuries. Every sudden noise made me jump. But little by little, I regained control. I spent my days planning, thinking about my next move. Clara brought me my laptop and a few things from the apartment. She informed me that Adam had reported me missing to the police, playing the part of the worried husband perfectly. The thought made me sick, but I knew I had to stay calm. Patience would be my greatest ally. I started gathering evidence. I combed through old emails and messages, searching for anything that exposed Adam's true nature. I found photos of bruises I had hidden out of shame. I documented moments when he had humiliated me in public, disguising his cruelty as jokes. Each passing day strengthened my resolve. I was no longer a victim, I was a survivor, and I was going to make Adam pay. One morning, as I sat on the terrace drinking coffee, an idea struck me. Adam thought he had killed me, but he had no idea I was plotting his downfall. The thought made me smile for the first time in weeks. I grabbed my phone and called Clara. "I need you to put me in touch with a lawyer," I said. "Someone who specializes in domestic violence cases." "Are you sure?" Clara asked, surprised by my determined tone. "More than ever," I replied. "It's time for action. Adam thinks he's won, but the game has only just begun." As I hung up, a surge of adrenaline coursed through me. The fear was still there, lurking deep inside me, but it no longer controlled me. I was ready to face what lay ahead. That evening, sitting at my laptop, I began to write my story. Every word felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I recounted everything. The early days of our relationship, the slow descent into hell, the psychological abuse, and finally, the attempted murder disguised as an accident. It was painful, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I saw everything clearly. Despite everything, I was still here. I felt truly alive. Adam had wanted to silence me, but he had failed. Now, it was my turn to speak. The days passed slowly in the little house in Saint-Nectaire. Every morning, I woke up with the same determination to make Adam pay for what he had done to me. But I knew that to achieve this, I had to be patient and methodical. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. One morning, as I was drinking coffee on the terrace watching the sun rise over the Auvergne volcanoes, my phone vibrated. It was Clara. "Hannah, I have good news. I found a lawyer willing to meet with you. He specializes in domestic violence cases." My heart leapt in my chest. This was the first concrete step toward my revenge. "That's perfect, Clara. When can I see him?" "He can meet you next week in Clermont-Ferrand. Do you feel ready?" I took a deep breath. Yes, I'm ready. It's time to act. After hanging up, I got to work. I had 1 week to prepare my case, to gather all the evidence I had collected against Adam. The next few days were spent sorting through emails, messages, and photos. Each item brought back painful memories, but I didn't let them weaken me. Every piece of evidence was another weapon in my arsenal. The day of the meeting with the lawyer finally arrived. I traveled to Clermont-Ferrand, my heart pounding. His office was in an old building in the city center. I was greeted by Maître Dupont, a man in his 50s with a kind expression. "Miss Leroy," he said, shaking my hand. "I'm sorry for what happened to you, but I promise we will do everything to seek justice." Over the next few hours, I told him everything. My voice trembled at times, but I refused to let emotions overwhelm me. I showed him the evidence I'd gathered. The photos of my injuries, the threatening messages from Adam, the testimonies of friends who had witnessed his outbursts. Maître Dupont listened intently, taking notes. When I finished, he looked me in the eyes. "Miss Leroy, you have a solid case, but I must warn you, it won't be easy. Your husband will likely deny everything. He'll claim your disappearance was an accident, that he thought you were dead." I nodded. "I know, that's why I need your help. I want him to pay, but I want to do it the right way," the lawyer smiled. "That's the right approach. Here's what we'll do. We'll build a solid case, gather all possible testimonies and evidence. Then, we'll file charges for attempted murder and domestic violence." Hearing someone else define my experience in such brutal terms made my stomach tighten. "And after that?" I asked. "Then, we let justice take its course. But it will take time. Are you ready for that?" I took a deep breath. Yes. I want justice, no matter how long it takes. Leaving Maître Dupont's office, I felt both exhausted and hopeful. For the first time since my fall at the Hérisson waterfalls, I felt like I was truly moving forward. Back in Saint-Nectaire, I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. Maître Dupont gave me a list of tasks. Gather more evidence, contact former colleagues or friends who could testify about Adam's behavior, and find medical records proving my past injuries. Each day I spent hours on the phone or my computer. I reached out to old acquaintances, neighbors, even members of Adam's family who had seen his behavior firsthand. Some refused to help, afraid to get involved. Others, however, were relieved to finally have the chance to speak. One evening, as I was working late on my case, I received a message from Clara. Adam is starting to ask questions. He contacted my parents to see if I'd heard from you. Be careful, my blood ran cold. Adam was becoming suspicious. I had to be even more careful. I decided to limit my communications, only leaving the house when absolutely necessary. My little hideaway in Saint-Nectaire became my fortress. The days passed and my case grew stronger. Reliving every painful moment of my marriage was exhausting, but this time, I was in control. Each piece of evidence I gathered was a step closer to my freedom. One morning, while working on my computer, an idea struck me. What if I could get a confession from Adam? If I could make him admit what he did, it would be undeniable proof. I immediately contacted Maître Dupont to share my idea. He hesitated. It's risky, Miss Leroy. If your husband finds out you're alive before we're ready, it could ruin everything. But I wasn't willing to let this idea go. I understand the risks, Maître, I said firmly. But imagine the impact it would have in court. Even a partial confession would change everything. After a long discussion, we agreed on a plan. I wouldn't contact Adam directly, but we would set a trap. We would create a false trail, making it seem like someone had information about my disappearance. In the coming weeks, we would carefully set everything in motion. The game was far from over, and this time, I was the one in control. With the help of Maître Dupont and a few trusted allies, we executed our strategy. Rumors began circulating in our old neighborhood in Paris. Witnesses claimed to have seen me on the day of my disappearance. Meanwhile, I continued working on my case. Each day brought new discoveries, some more painful than others. I found old photos of us, smiling, happy. These images tugged at my heart, reminding me of the woman I had been, the one who had believed in Adam's love, but I didn't let it weaken me. These memories only fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself, but for all the women who, like me, had been trapped in toxic relationships. One evening, while rereading my file for the 100th time, my phone rang. It was Maître Dupont. Miss Leroy, we have news. Adam took the bait. He contacted one of our false witnesses, trying to buy their silence. We recorded everything. My heart pounded. This was exactly what we had hoped for. Adam had just made a critical mistake. What do we do now? I asked, my voice trembling with excitement. Now, we go on the offensive. It's time to file a formal complaint. Are you ready? I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when I would finally face Adam, not as a victim, but as a survivor determined to get justice. Yes, I'm ready. As I hung up, I gazed out the window. The sun was setting over the Auvergne volcanoes, painting the sky in red and gold. It marked the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new one. I had survived the fall, the injuries, the loneliness, and the fear. Now, it was time to take back control of my life. I stepped onto the terrace, inhaling the cool evening air. Tomorrow would mark a new chapter, one where I was no longer the victim, but the author of my own destiny. Adam had tried to silence me, but he had failed. Now, it was my turn to speak, to shout the truth to the world. Night was falling on Saint-Nectaire, but for me, it was the dawn of a new day. A day of justice, a day of truth, and I was ready to face it, no matter what. The day had finally arrived. After months of preparation, careful planning, and gathering evidence, I was returning to Paris. I was going to fight Adam. I stood before the mirror in the small bathroom of the Saint-Nectaire house, studying my reflection. The woman staring back at me was both familiar and unrecognizable. My hair had grown, I had lost weight, and my eyes held a determination I had never known before. I was no longer the Hannah that Adam had tried to kill. I was someone new, someone stronger. Clara was waiting for me in the car. She had insisted on accompanying me to Paris, refusing to let me face this ordeal alone. As we left Saint-Nectaire, I took one last look at the little house that had been my refuge. I had found peace there, but also the strength to fight. The journey to Paris was long and silent. Clara respected my need for quiet, allowing me to mentally prepare for what lay ahead. I went over every step of our plan, ensuring everything would go exactly as we had discussed with Maître Dupont. As we approached the city, my heart beat faster. The familiar streets passed before my eyes, bringing back memories I had tried to bury. I recognized the cafe where Adam and I used to have Sunday breakfast, the park where we had our first kiss. Each place carried conflicting emotions, nostalgia mixed with bitterness. Clara parked in front of Maître Dupint's office. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. I took a deep breath. As ready as I can be. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Maître Dupont went over the plan one last time. "Adam doesn't know you're alive yet, Miss Leroy. First, we'll file the formal complaint. Then, we'll summon him for questioning. That's where you come in." I nodded, adrenaline coursing through my veins. What if he denies everything? Maître Dupont gave a knowing smile. "That's where our evidence comes in. We have a strong case. And with the recording of his attempted witness bribery, we have exactly what we need to crack him." The next few hours passed in a blur. I signed documents, answered questions, confirmed details. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching my life unfold from the outside. Then, the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated arrived. Adam had been summoned to the police station. It was time for me to go. Clara accompanied me to the entrance. She hugged me tightly. "You're the bravest person I know, Hannah. You're going to get through this." I thanked her with a trembling smile and stepped inside. Maître Dupont was waiting for me. He led me to a small waiting room. "Stay here until they come for you," he instructed. I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. The minutes crawled by. I heard muffled voices, footsteps in the hallway. My pulse quickened. Then suddenly a voice cut through the air, a voice I knew all too well. "Adam." He sounded angry, demanding to know why he had been refused. The moment Adam was summoned, my body stiffened, a wave of fear washing over me. But I forced myself to breathe deeply, reminding myself of everything I had endured to get here. The door opened suddenly, and a police officer entered. "Miss Leroy, it's time." I stood up, my legs trembling. Maître Dupont joined me, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Are you ready?" I nodded, unable to speak. We stepped into the interrogation room. Adam sat with his back to us, facing two officers. When the door closed, he turned around. Time seemed to freeze. Our eyes met, and I saw a storm of emotions pass over his face. Surprise, disbelief, fear, and finally, that cold anger I knew too well. "Hannah," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I took a deep breath. "Hello, Adam." The officers began their questioning, but I barely heard them. All I could see was Adam, the man I had loved, the man who had tried to kill me. He seemed smaller now, less intimidating than in my memories. Slowly, the officers' words became clearer. They asked Adam to explain what had happened on our anniversary. He hesitated, contradicting himself. I saw the panic flicker in his eyes. Then it was my turn to speak. My voice shook at first, but as I told my story, it grew steadier. I spoke of the gradual destruction of our marriage, the psychological abuse, and finally, that fateful day at the Harrison waterfalls. Adam tried to interrupt to deny it all, but the evidence was overwhelming. Photos of my injuries, testimonies from friends and neighbors, and most importantly, the recording of him attempting to bribe a witness. As the interrogation continued, I watched Adam crumble, his mask of the perfect husband shattered, revealing the cruel man beneath. Finally, after hours of questioning, Adam snapped. Okay, he shouted. "I tried to kill her. She was going to leave me. She was going to ruin everything." A dead silence filled the room. I felt tears run down my cheeks, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of relief. The officers stood ready to place Adam under arrest. As they secured the handcuffs around his wrists, he looked at me one last time. "I am sorry, Hannah," he whispered. But there was no remorse in his eyes, only anger at being caught. As they led him away, I collapsed into my chair, unable to move. Maître Dupont placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Mademoiselle Leroy. You did it." I left the police station in a daze. Clara was waiting for me outside, her eyes full of concern. The moment she saw me, she ran toward me and pulled me into her arms. "Hannah, how did it go?" I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. I cried in my friend's arms, releasing months of fear, tension, and pain. "It's over," I whispered between sobs. He admitted it. Clara hugged me tighter. You did it, Hannah. You're so strong. That night, we stayed at Clara's place. I wasn't ready to return to the apartment I had shared with Adam. Lying in the guest bed, I thought about everything that had happened. I had survived. I had faced my fears. I had confronted Adam, and I had won. The road had been long and painful, but I had reached the end. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. For the first time in months, I felt free. Adam could no longer hurt me. He was finally going to pay for what he had done. Clara offered to accompany me to the apartment to collect my things. I hesitated, but I knew it was something I had to do. It was a necessary step to move forward. When we arrived in front of the building, my heart pounded. So many memories were tied to this place, some good, many bad, but I was determined not to let them consume me. As I stepped inside, I was struck by the silence. Everything was exactly as I had left it the day Adam and I had gone on that trip. It was as if time had frozen. Slowly, I moved from room to room, gathering my belongings. Each object carried a memory of my life with Adam, but instead of hurting me, those memories now felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. Leaving the apartment, I felt lighter. It wasn't just objects I'd left behind, it was the weight of my past. Standing on the sidewalk, I turned back for one final look at the building. Goodbye, I whispered. It wasn't just a farewell to a place. It was a farewell to the part of my life that had nearly destroyed me. Clara took my hand. Where do you want to go now? She asked. I smiled, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. True hope for the future. I don't know yet, but I do know I'm ready to start over. As we walked away, a wave of gratitude filled me, for Clara, for Maître Dupont, for everyone who had stood by me. I had survived. I had fought. And now, I was ready to live. The sun was shining over Paris, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly alive. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. That was my greatest victory. The days following Adam's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and endless obligations. I was caught in an exhausting cycle of meetings at Maître Dupont's office and the police station, answering questions, signing papers, trying to make sense of everything. I felt stronger than ever. Whenever doubt crept in, I remembered the moment Adam had confessed. That memory, though painful, reminded me why I was fighting. One morning, as I sipped my coffee in Clara's apartment, my phone rang. It was Maître Dupont. Mademoiselle Leroy, he said, his voice laced with excitement. I have news. The prosecutor has decided to charge Adam with attempted murder and domestic violence. The trial will take place in 3 months. My heart leaped. It was both terrifying and liberating. 3 months, I repeated, trying to process the information. What should I do until then? For now, rest, Maître Dupont advised. We have a solid case, but there's something else. I wanted to inform you that several journalists have heard about your story. They'd like to interview you. This could be an opportunity to raise awareness about domestic violence. What do you think? I fell silent, considering his proposal. The thought of sharing my story publicly was daunting. But then, I thought of the women who might be in the same situation I had been in. Okay, I finally said, I'll do it. If my story can help even one person, it will be worth it. The following weeks were intense. I gave multiple interviews, recounting my experience again and again. Each time, it was difficult, but I could feel it making me stronger. I saw awareness in the eyes of journalists, compassion in readers' messages, and sometimes, even recognition from those who had lived through similar experiences. One day, after finishing an interview for a major women's magazine, I received a message from an unknown number. My heart stopped when I read it. Do you really think you'll get away with this? It's not over, Hannah. My hands trembled as I showed the message to Clara, who had accompanied me. It's Adam, I said, my voice shaking. How did he get this number? He's supposed to be in pre-trial detention. Clara reacted immediately, grabbing her phone. I'm calling Maître Dupont right now. The hours that followed were a nightmare. The police were alerted, my phone was examined, and additional security measures were put in place. But the damage was done. The fear I had worked so hard to overcome was back. gripping my throat like a vice. That night, unable to sleep, I got up and turned on my computer. I began writing, letting my thoughts and emotions spill onto the screen. With every word, my determination solidified. Adam wanted to scare me, to silence me, but I wouldn't let him win. The next morning, I called Maître Dupont. I want to do more, I told him. I want to create an organization to help victims of domestic violence. I want my story to serve something bigger. A brief silence followed. Then Maître Dupont replied, "That's a great idea, Mademoiselle Leroy. I know some people who can help you set it up." The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Between trial preparations and building the organization, I barely had time to think about Adam's threat. I threw myself into this new project, finding purpose in it. We decided to call the association New Departure. I wanted the name to symbolize hope, the possibility of starting over after surviving hell. With Clara's help and a team of volunteers, we set up a support hotline, counseling groups, and even emergency housing for women in danger. One day, as we prepared for the official launch, I received a call from a woman named Sophie. She had read my story in a magazine and found the courage to leave her abusive husband. "Your story saved my life," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I didn't know how to escape, but reading what you went through, I realized I wasn't alone, that I could get out too." Her words shook me to my core. For the first time, I fully grasped the impact of my testimony. It wasn't just my story anymore. It had become a message of hope for others. The day of New Departure's launch finally arrived. We chose a small venue in the 11th arrondissement of Paris, a warm and welcoming space. Journalists, representatives from other organizations, and even some political figures were present. Standing in front of the microphone, I scanned the crowd. I saw Clara, smiling at me with pride. I saw Maître Dupont, nodding in encouragement. And I saw faces I didn't recognize, women who were perhaps here because they needed help, or because they wanted to help others. I took a deep breath and began. A few months ago, I was at the bottom of a chasm. I had survived an attempted murder by the man I loved. But I was broken, terrified, and without hope. I stand before you today, not as a victim, but as a survivor. As I spoke, my voice grew stronger. I shared my experience, but also the stories of the courageous women I had met since. Stories of resilience, of survival. I spoke about our vision for New Departure, our mission to provide not just shelter, but the tools to rebuild a life. Domestic violence thrives in silence and isolation, I concluded, but today, we break that silence. The applause that followed was deafening. People stood, some with tears in their eyes. I saw women embracing, men nodding with determination. After the ceremony, as I spoke with guests, a woman approached me. She looked nervous, almost frightened. "My name is Leah," she said softly. "Your speech, it made me realize that I'm not alone, that I can get out." I took her trembling hands in mine, feeling the depth of her fear. "You are not alone, Leah. We're here to help you. You've already taken the hardest step." As I guided her to Clara so she could speak privately, I had a realization. This was why I was fighting. For Leah, for Sophie, for every woman who needed hope. That night, when I returned home, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. Adam's threat still lingered somewhere in the back of my mind, but it no longer controlled me. I had found purpose, a reason to keep fighting. The trial was approaching, and I knew it would be a difficult battle. But I was no longer alone. I had New Departure. I had all these courageous women standing beside me. Together, we were stronger than any threat. As I lay in bed, I thought of the Hannah I had been months ago, the one who had been pushed into the freezing waters of the Hérisson waterfalls. She had survived. She had fought. And now she had transformed into someone new. The fight wasn't over. Far from it. But for the first time in a long time, I faced the future with hope. Whatever Adam might still try, I knew I would never stand alone. I had found my voice, and I would use it, for myself and for those who had yet to speak. Tomorrow would bring a new challenge, a new battle. But I was ready to face it, more determined than ever. The weeks leading up to the trial passed in a blur. Between preparations with Maître Dupont, running New Departure, and my therapy sessions, I barely had time to breathe. Despite the chaos, I felt a sense of inner peace I hadn't known in years. One evening, after returning from a meeting with our volunteers, I found an envelope slipped under my door. My heart clenched as I recognized Adam's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Hannah, I know you think you've won, but don't forget. I know you better than anyone. I know exactly how to destroy you. The game isn't over. Adam." I dropped the letter, my mind spinning. How had he sent this? He was in pre-trial detention. Was it an empty threat, or did he really have a plan? Panic clawed at my chest. I immediately called Maître Dupont and the police. They took the threat seriously, increasing security around me and investigating how Adam had managed to send the letter. The following days were tense. I jumped at every noise, constantly looked over my shoulder. The fear I had fought so hard to overcome threatened to consume me again. But in the midst of my turmoil, I found strength in an unexpected place. The women of New Departure. The same women I had helped, the ones who had leaned on me, now stood by my side. They sent messages of encouragement, accompanied me on errands, surrounded me with a shield of support and love. I was no longer fighting alone. The day of the trial finally arrived. The Paris courthouse loomed before me, its stone walls heavy with the weight of justice and injustice alike. Clara and Maître Dupont walked beside me, my heart hammering in my chest. As I entered the courtroom, I saw him, Adam. He sat there calm and composed, as if attending a business meeting. Our eyes met and a shiver ran through me. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was determination. The trial began. The lawyers presented their arguments. Witnesses took the stand. I listened as they recounted the nightmare I had lived through, my own life unfolding before me in painful, undeniable truth. Hearing others describe the slow descent into the hell of my marriage, seeing the evidence pile up against Adam was both excruciating and liberating. Then, my turn came. As I stepped up to the witness stand, I felt the weight of countless eyes on me. I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told my story, the love, the slow unraveling, the fear, and finally, the moment he had tried to end my life. My voice did not waver. I spoke with clarity, looking straight ahead, refusing to meet Adam's gaze. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room. The emotion in the air was palpable. Adam's lawyer attempted to discredit me during cross-examination, implying that I had fabricated everything as revenge against a husband I no longer loved. But I stood firm, unwavering in the truth. The trial stretched over several days. Each day was grueling, but every evening I left feeling stronger, held up by the unwavering support of my friends and the women who now walk this journey with me. Finally, the time for the closing arguments arrived. Adam's lawyer painted the picture of a loving man, the victim of a tragic misunderstanding. Maître Dupont, however, presented with strength and emotion the story of a woman who had endured years of abuse, only to come face to face with death at the hands of her husband. Then it was time for the jury to deliberate. The hours of waiting felt endless. I spent them surrounded by Clara and the women of New Departure, drawing strength from their collective support. When the jury finally returned, my heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. The jury foreman stood, his expression solemn. "We, the members of the jury, declare the accused, Adam Lefebvre, guilty of attempted murder and domestic violence." A buzzing filled my ears. I felt Clara's arms wrap around me. Cheers and exclamations of joy rang out around me, but my eyes were locked on Adam. For the first time, I saw his mask crack, the weight of reality finally sinking in. The judge delivered the sentence. 15 years in prison. Adam was led away, casting me one final glance. Hatred, remorse. I couldn't tell. It didn't matter. It was over. As I left the courthouse, I was met by a wave of journalists and supporters. Women I didn't know embraced me, thanked me. I saw tears in their eyes, and I understood. My victory was theirs too. That night, I couldn't sleep. The adrenaline still coursed through my veins, mixed with a relief so deep it was almost painful. In the early hours of the morning, I stepped out onto the balcony of my apartment. The sun was rising over Paris, casting a golden glow on the rooftops. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp morning air. For the first time since that day at the Hérisson waterfalls, I truly felt free. The following days were a whirlwind. The media followed my story closely, as well as the work of New Departure. I gave interviews, appeared on television programs, all with the goal of raising awareness about domestic violence. The association grew rapidly. More and more women reached out, some seeking help, others offering support. We opened new shelters, launched vocational training programs to help survivors regain their independence. One day, about 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from a woman named Amélie. She wrote to tell me that my testimony had given her the courage to leave her abusive husband and file a complaint. "You showed me that it was possible to escape," she wrote. "You saved my life." Her words struck me deeply. I realized that my suffering had not been in vain. By speaking out, by taking action, I had helped others break free from the cycle of violence. 1 year to the day after the verdict, I returned to the Hérisson waterfalls. This time, I wasn't alone. Clara and several women from New Departure stood beside me. As I gazed at the rushing water, I thought of everything that had happened since that fateful day. I had survived the fall. I had survived fear, pain, and betrayal. I had faced my abuser and won. But more than anything, I had found meaning in my experience. I had turned my suffering into strength, a force to help others. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small box. Inside was my wedding ring. I had kept it all this time, unable to let it go. But now, it was time. With a steady hand, I tossed the box into the churning waters below. I watched as it disappeared, carried away by the current, just like the past I'd finally left behind. Turning to my friends, I smiled. "It's really over now," I said. "It's time to focus on the future." As we walked away from the waterfalls, I felt a deep, undeniable peace settle over me. The road had been long and painful, but I had made it to the other side. I was stronger, more resilient. I had found a purpose that gave my life new meaning. The game had ended, and I had won, not just for myself, but for all the women still fighting. And as long as there were women in need, I would keep fighting. I would keep speaking. I would keep acting. Because every life saved, every woman freed from violence, was one more victory against those who thought they could silence us. The future stretched ahead, full of promise, and I was ready to embrace it. Head held high, heart wide open. If there is one lesson I've learned from my journey, it's this: silence is the greatest ally of violence. Abuse thrives in the shadows, feeding on fear, shame, and isolation. But the moment we break the silence, we take back our power. If you or someone you know is trapped in a toxic relationship, know that there is a way out. You're not weak for being afraid, and you're not alone. Speak up, reach out, and ask for help. There will always be people ready to stand beside you, just as Clara and New Departure stood beside me. Healing takes time and justice is never easy, but every step forward is a victory. I survived, and so can you. My story is just one among many, but if it inspires even one person to fight for their freedom, then every battle I face was worth it. Thank you for listening.